The Arrival of Terror. It was an autumn evening in the peaceful village of Redwood, in the heart of Texas, USA. The streets were silent, and the few residents who still walked the sidewalks hurried towards their homes, eager to escape the biting cold that was approaching with the arrival of night. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of the city, something sinister was moving in the shadows. A lone clown dressed in colorful clothes and a macabre smile painted on his face emerged from the darkest corners, his presence shrouded in mystery and fear. No one knew where he came from or what his purpose was, but his arrival coincided with a series of disturbing events that shook the small community. Residents began reporting strange sightings of the clown, always lurking in the shadows, silently observing from afar. Rumors quickly spread throughout the city, fueling fear and paranoia among Redwood's inhabitants. Some believed the clown was just someone's bad prank, while others saw his presence as an ominous omen of worse things to come. On that fateful night, as the clock struck midnight, the clown finally revealed his true nature. He emerged from the shadows once again, but this time he was not alone. In his hands he carried a gleaming knife, its blade shining in the moonlight as he slowly advanced towards the heart of the sleeping city. While the residents of Redwood slept peacefully in their beds, oblivious to the approaching danger, the killer clown began his terrifying dance of death. He walked through the deserted streets, his laughter echoing through the night air as he left a trail of terror and destruction in his wake. It was the beginning of a night of unimaginable horror, and just the first chapter in a saga of fear and despair that would forever haunt the streets of Redwood. The killer clown had arrived, and with him he had brought chaos and death, plunging the entire city into an endless nightmare. The next morning in Redwood brought with it a gray and dreary dawn, reflecting the mood of the townspeople. News of the horrific massacre perpetrated by the killer clown spread like wildfire, leaving the community in a state of shock and grief. Local authorities, perplexed and overwhelmed by the horror of what had happened, launched a frantic investigation to capture whoever was responsible for the massacre. But despite his Herculean efforts, the killer clown seemed to have disappeared into the shadows without a trace. Meanwhile, fear spread like a plague across the city of Redwood. Residents lived in constant fear that the clown could return at any moment, ready to unleash another wave of violence and death on them. Streets that were once busy were now deserted, businesses closed, and children locked in their homes afraid to go out. The atmosphere of distrust and paranoia hung in the air, turning Redwood into a pale shadow of what it used to be. Meanwhile, residents were desperately trying to find a way to protect themselves from the imminent danger. Some have installed security systems in their homes, while others have formed surveillance groups to patrol the streets at night. But despite his efforts, the fear persisted, like an ominous shadow that refused to dissipate. As the sun set over Redwood once again, residents gathered in their homes, locking their doors and windows with the fragile hope that it would be enough to keep them safe. But in the back of their minds, everyone knew that the killer clown was still out there, waiting in the shadows, ready to strike again at any moment. And so the city remained trapped in a state of fear and despair, at the mercy of the terror that had descended upon them. As the sun set over Redwood, the city's gloomy atmosphere intensified. Residents remained on alert, afraid to leave their homes even during the day. The streets were deserted except for the occasional presence of a police officer patrolling the shadows for any sign of the killer clown. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, a team of investigators worked tirelessly to uncover the dark secrets surrounding the killer's identity and motives. They examined every detail of previous attacks, looking for patterns and clues that could lead to the capture of the criminal. Each clue found raised more questions than answers. The city's oldest residents began to remember old stories about a traveling circus that used to pass through the area decades ago. The circus was said to be inhabited by a troupe of disturbing clowns, whose actions triggered a series of tragic events that haunted the town for years. As investigators delved deeper into the history of the circus and its members, they uncovered dark and disturbing secrets that had been buried beneath layers of time. Rumors of sinister rituals and pacts with evil forces hung in the air, fueling the fears and superstitions of Redwood residents. As the investigation continued, the city's residents were torn between the desire for justice and the fear of the unknown. They knew that the true nature of the killer clown was yet to be revealed, and that the darkness surrounding him was deeper than they ever imagined. And so the hunt for Redwood's dark secrets continued, with each step taking them deeper into the abyss of terror. As the investigations continued, the city of Redwood descended deeper into chaos and distrust. Residents looked at each other with suspicion, fearing that the killer was hiding among them, disguised under the mask of normality. Meanwhile, a group of intrepid young people decided to venture into the city at night, determined to discover the truth behind the terrible events. Among them was Sarah, a fearless young woman whose curiosity led her to explore the darkest corners of Redwood. On a dark and stormy night, the group gathered in the city's central square, their faces illuminated only by the dim light of the lanterns they carried with them. Determined to unravel the mystery of the killer clown, they headed toward the deserted streets, each step taking them deeper into the heart of darkness. As they ventured through the empty streets, a feeling of restlessness began to settle among them. The wind howled between the abandoned buildings, and sinister shadows danced on the walls like specters hungry for their souls. It was then that they spotted him, the killer clown, standing in the middle of the street, his macabre smile illuminated by the dim light of the lanterns. His eyes seemed to shine with an unearthly light, and his contorted body seemed to move in an inhuman manner. In an instant of pure terror, the group realized they were trapped. The clown approached slowly, his presence emanating an aura of evil that made their hearts race with fear. And then, with a quick and violent movement, he launched himself at them, plunging them into an endless nightmare. As the group of young people struggled to escape the killer clown's clutches, the town of Redwood plunged even deeper into the abyss of terror. The screams echoed through the deserted streets, but no one was around to hear or help. Sarah and her friends ran desperately through the dark streets, trying to find an escape route from the terrible creature that was chasing them. The clown, with his sinister footsteps and macabre laugh, seemed to be everywhere at once, his presence enveloping them like a deadly shadow. Amid the chaos and confusion, one of the group tripped and fell, his scream of terror echoing through the night. Sarah paused for a moment, her heart beating wildly in her chest as she fought the urge to go back to help her friend. But before she could make any decisions, a shadowy figure emerged from the shadows and grabbed her friend, dragging him into the darkness with supernatural strength. The group watched helplessly, horrified, as their friend disappeared before their eyes, swallowed by the nightmare that surrounded them. With a last desperate effort, Sarah and the survivors managed to find a temporary hiding place, an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city. They locked the doors and windows, praying that the clown wouldn't find them there. But even within those decrepit walls, terror haunted them. The sounds of scratching and laughter echoed through the air as the clown circled around the house like a predator stalking its prey. And so, trapped in an endless nightmare, Sarah and her friends faced the terrible truth that they were in the clutches of evil. Inside the abandoned house, Sarah and her friends were surrounded by darkness and the terror that the killer clowns brought with them. As they waited in agony, a feeling of helplessness enveloped them, but also a fierce determination to survive and unravel the mystery that was plaguing the city. As the night wore on, they began searching the house's dusty rooms for any clue that would help them understand what was going on. It was then that they found an old box of memories, hidden in a dark corner of the attic. Inside the box were old photographs, yellowed newspaper clippings, and old letters, all revealing fragments of a dark past that had been forgotten with time. Among the photographs were disturbing images of a traveling circus, where sinister and macabre clowns enchanted crowds with their tricks and juggles. As they looked through the newspaper clippings, a story began to unfold before their eyes. The circus was said to have a history marked by tragedies and mysterious deaths, including that of a young clown whose tormented spirit haunts the town to this day. With the discovery of this disturbing revelation, Sarah and her friends realized that the killer clown terrorizing Redwood was more than just a mere killer. He was a manifestation of an ancient evil, a supernatural entity that had returned to exact its revenge on those who had forgotten their dark past. Armed with this knowledge, Sarah and her friends realized there was only one way to end the killer clown's reign of terror. They would have to confront the past and face evil head-on. With their hearts full of courage and determination, they prepared for the final confrontation, knowing that the fate of the city and their own lives was at stake. With knowledge of the killer clown's dark past in hand, Sarah and her friends prepared for the final showdown. Armed with courage and determination, they knew that the coming battle would be the hardest of their lives, but also the most important. Leaving the abandoned house under cover of night, they ventured through the silent streets of Redwood, towards the heart of darkness where the killer clown waited. Their footsteps echoed through the air, each one charged with the promise of courage and sacrifice. When they finally reached the location where the traveling circus had performed decades ago, the killer clown emerged from the shadows, his sinister figure shrouded in an aura of malice and hatred. His eyes shone with an unearthly light, and his macabre smile seemed to stretch into eternity. Without hesitation, Sarah and her friends charged forward, facing the clown with grim determination. A fierce battle unfolded, with blows and counterblows exchanged in the darkness. Every moment was a fight for survival, with the city's fate hanging in the balance. But despite his valiant efforts, the killer clown was an unstoppable force, fueled by the hatred and revenge of decades past. He seemed invincible, his laughter echoing through the air as he dominated his adversaries with merciless ferocity. However, Sarah and her friends didn't give up. With courage and determination, they came together in one last, final effort, channeling their strength and hope into a final attack against the killer clown. And then, in an instant of triumph and sacrifice, the killer clown was defeated, his form disappearing into the shadows as the light of dawn began to illuminate the sky. Redwood was finally free of the evil that was plaguing it, and its inhabitants could finally begin to rebuild their lives. As the sun rose over the horizon, Sarah and her friends looked at each other with a sense of accomplishment and gratitude. They had faced terror head-on and emerged victorious, proving that even in the darkest of times, courage and hope can prevail over evil.